April 8, 1943. 27,000 feet above Caen, France. Through the crystal canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190A5, Oberleutnant Ralph Hermachen spotted something unusual. Huge silver dots, struggling upward through the thin, icy air. He couldn't help but grin behind his oxygen mask. "D'Armée has sent us flying milk bottles," he laughed over the radio, and the channel filled with the sound of German amusement. Below them, 16 Republic P-47C Thunderbolts of the 4th Fighter Group clawed their way upward. Their 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney double Wasp engines howling against the weight of 7 tons of steel. They looked absurd, fat-bodied giants with stubby wings and propellers that seemed larger than their entire fuselage. To the Luftwaffe aces circling above, these new American fighters were a joke. To them, air combat was elegance, a dance of grace, precision, and speed. The P-47 looked like a drunk elephant trying to fly. But hidden inside that ungainly frame was a machine built by a nation that measured war in factories, not dogfights. Within 18 months, these milk bottles would become the hammer that shattered the Luftwaffe's wings. Each Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition, 6,000 bullets per minute, enough firepower to saw a Messerschmitt in half in under 2 seconds. Major Donald Blakesley, commander of the 335th Squadron, had flown Spitfires with the RAF. He knew something his men didn't. To survive in a Thunderbolt, you had to unlearn everything you thought you knew about air combat. This wasn't a knife fight in the clouds. It was a gunship duel in the stratosphere. That morning, over France, 2 worlds collided. Germany's precision against America's power. And as the laughter faded through Hermachen's radio, destiny was climbing toward them, on wings of steel and thunder. The Thunderbolt was born out of fear. Summer, 1940, France had fallen. German fighters ruled the skies of Europe. Inside Republic Aviation, a frantic telegram arrived. The U.S. Army Air Corps demanded a miracle, a high-altitude interceptor that could challenge the Luftwaffe. Alexander Kartveli, the Georgian-born chief designer, looked at the specifications and sighed. "It will be a dinosaur," he said quietly, "but a dinosaur with good proportions." And so the monster began to take shape. The XP-47B prototype rolled out on May 6, 1941. It stunned everyone who saw it. At nearly 10,000 pounds empty, it was 65% heavier than any fighter before it. Its belly bulged with a turbo supercharger system that filled half the fuselage. Ducts, turbines, and pipes twisting like mechanical intestines. Pilots stared in disbelief. This thing actually flies? Not only did it fly, it climbed like nothing else on Earth. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, 18 cylinders, 2,000 horsepower, could breathe at 27,000 feet, where German engines gasped for oxygen. The turbo supercharger turned exhaust fire into raw power, feeding sea-level pressure into the stratosphere. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group was one of the first to receive the beast. He hated it. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the P-47 killed more Americans in training than Germans would in its first months of combat. It ground-looped on landing, it torque-rolled on takeoff, and in dives its controls froze solid. Pilots learned the word compressibility the hard way. But those who survived discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a quiet farm boy from Oklahoma, described his first flight in the Thunderbolt. "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive," he said. "The power. It didn't fly. You aimed it. When you pulled the trigger, 8.50 caliber guns turned that locomotive into a storm of metal and fire." The monster was alive now, and soon it would learn to hunt. 10:25,000, April 1943. The sky over occupied France shimmered with sunlight and gunfire. For the first time, The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt met the Luftwaffe head-on. 16 P-47s of the 4th Fighter Group climbed slowly through thin air, their massive radial engines thundering, their pilots still unsure of the monster beneath them. Above, the Germans waited. Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts, lean, agile predators honed by 4 years of war. They watched the newcomers rise like lumbering whales and laughed. To them, it was absurd. The P-47 couldn't turn. It couldn't climb fast. It looked more like a flying beer keg than a fighter. Joseph Pips Priller, the legendary German ace of JG-26, wrote in his logbook that week, "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck and climbs like a pregnant cow." He wasn't wrong, not yet. In April and May, Thunderbolt units lost 14 aircraft for just 3 confirmed German kills. British Spitfire pilots mocked the Americans in mess halls. The best evasive maneuver in a P-47, they joked, is to unstrap and run around the cockpit. But hidden beneath the laughter, a truth was beginning to emerge. The P-47 could take punishment, more than anything the Luftwaffe had ever seen. One aircraft returned from a mission riddled with 21 cannon holes and more than 100 machine gun strikes, and it still flew home. The Thunderbolt's massive radial engine, air-cooled, without fragile radiators, shrugged off hits that would have killed a liquid-cooled Spitfire or Messerschmitt instantly. Its armor plate deflected shells that shattered glass-canopied cockpits. Its heavy frame absorbed damage like a steel wall in the sky, and when the Thunderbolt fired back, the air itself seemed to explode. 8 synchronized Brownings firing 6,000 rounds a minute created a zone of destruction so dense, so merciless, that anything caught within it simply ceased to exist. The day the laughter stopped came on June 26, 1943, over the town of Lille, France. It began like any other dogfight, but it would end as legend. Fade-in roaring engines, distant gunfire. June 26, 1943, over Lille, France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, of the 61st Fighter Squadron, was about to discover what the word indestructible truly meant. His formation of Thunderbolts had been ambushed. 16 Focke-Wulf 190s diving from the sun. Dive siren, cannon fire bursts. In the first seconds of combat, Johnson's aircraft was ripped apart. 21 20mm shells tore through the fuselage. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit. The canopy cracked and jammed shut. Smoke filled his lungs. He was bleeding. His nose, his leg, his arm. The engines shuddered, coughing smoke and fire. Johnson tried to bail out. He couldn't. A shell fragment had welded the canopy track closed. He was trapped inside a dying machine. At 27,000 feet, he leveled the crippled fighter. Oil sprayed across the windscreen, blinding him. With barely any control, he turned west, toward England. Then, out of nowhere, a lone Focke-Wulf appeared, a hunter, smelling blood. The German pilot lined up behind him. 4 20mm cannons opened fire. Johnson's cockpit shook like it was struck by sledgehammers. He curled behind the armor plate, waiting for the end. But the Thunderbolt refused to die. The German pilot fired again. Every cannon shell, every machine gun burst, until his ammunition ran dry. Still, the P-47 flew on. The enemy eased alongside, matching speed at 170 miles per hour. Through the shattered glass, Johnson could see him, young, blonde, expressionless. The German stared in disbelief. He shook his head slowly, then raised his hand, and saluted. He banked away, disappearing into the clouds. Johnson's Thunderbolt limped across the channel, engine coughing, metal torn, controls hanging by threads. He landed at Manston, England, skidding to a stop as the engine finally died. His crew counted bullet holes. They stopped after 200. A mechanic whispered, "She shouldn't have made it." Johnson smiled weakly. "She's a Thunderbolt," he said. The story spread across every airbase in England. Pilots began to look at their machines differently, not as planes, but as armor-plated angels. For the first time, The Luftwaffe feared not the man inside the cockpit, but the machine itself. The rule in By mid-1943, the Americans had learned. The Thunderbolt wasn't a dancer. It was a battering ram with wings. Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke drilled his men relentlessly. "Don't turn with them," he barked. "Don't try to climb with them. Use your weight, use your speed, dive and kill." And that was how the hunters became the hunted. At 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter alive. When the Thunderbolt dove, it wasn't flying, it was falling like a meteor. Its boom and zoom tactic was born. American formations would climb high, waiting like hawks in the stratosphere. Then they would roll over, screaming down from the sun, firing in a single devastating pass. German pilots who survived the first strike said it was like flying into a wall of fire. 8 heavy machine guns, all converging on a 6-foot circle at 300 yards, a storm of lead and flame. August 17, 1943, the dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Major David Schilling's flight encountered a formation of twin-engine Messerschmitt 100s and 10s. The Germans were preparing to attack B-17 bombers. They never got the chance. Dive sirens, chaotic gunfire, radio shouting. Schilling's Thunderbolts came down like thunderbolts from heaven. A German gunner later said, "The American fighters came like hammers from the clouds. I hit one, it didn't even flinch. Then it fired, and my world turned white." 8 Messerschmitt 100s and 10s were annihilated in less than a minute. The air was full of falling wings and burning engines. For the Luftwaffe, this was the moment the sky turned against them. Propeller whine blending with distant explosions. Winter, 1944. The Thunderbolt had evolved again. The new P-47 D-22 had arrived, equipped with the mighty paddle blade propeller. It no longer lumbered. It roared upward like a titan. German ace Heinrich Kanaka wrote in his diary, "They've learned to climb. We laughed last year, no one laughs now." At low altitude, the P-47 was terrifying. At high altitude, it was invincible. Its new propeller bit into the air like a giant's fist, boosting climb rate, acceleration, and the sound that ground troops called Donnerschlag, thunderclap. When the invasion of Normandy began, 500 Thunderbolts darkened the French sky. Hundreds of engines overhead, gunfire rolling. German fighter groups tried to intercept. Out of 12 that took off, only 3 returned. Major Gunther Rahl, one of Germany's greatest aces, barely survived his encounter. "They came down like an avalanche," he said later. "Their guns didn't chatter, they roared. Once they fired, there was nothing left to save." By the end of D-Day, the Luftwaffe had lost control of the sky. Forever. Behind the thunder in the sky was thunder in the factories. Republic Aviation built 15,683 Thunderbolts, 1 every hour. Each aircraft required 65,000 parts, 8 miles of wiring, and 2,000 pounds of aluminum. And they were built not by soldiers, but by ordinary Americans, farmers, mechanics, and women who had never seen an airplane before the war. At the peak of production, the Evansville plant in Indiana rolled out 500 new Thunderbolts per month. Major George Brooking of the 365th Fighter Group saw the power of that industry firsthand. January 1, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe's last great gamble. Hundreds of German fighters stormed Allied airfields across Belgium. At Brookings Base, 22 Thunderbolts burned on the ground. A captured German pilot sneered, "Now you have nothing left." Brooking pointed to the runway. "By tomorrow," he said, "we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German smile vanished, because that was the truth. America's factories never slept, and Germany's never woke again. By 1945, the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. The few German pilots left alive feared a sound more than death itself. the deep, rolling growl of approaching thunderbolts. They called it Jabo fever, fighter-bomber fever, panic attacks, sweat, shaking hands before every mission. The statistics were devastating. Over 7,000 aircraft destroyed, 86,000 railcars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 tanks, 68,000 trucks. The Luftwaffe lost 28,000 pilots. Many died never even seeing the enemy that killed them. German intelligence reports told the story. April 1943, inferior. December 1943, significant threat. June 1944, dominant. March 1945, unsurvivable. The laughter that once filled German radios was gone forever. After the war, Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland stood before a room of reporters. Someone asked him about the P-47. He smiled sadly. "We laughed in 1943, he said. "We called them fat American cows. But we stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed their guns, and you ceased to exist." Galland's voice trembled slightly. The Americans didn't build a European fighter. They built an American one, a machine of pure industrial logic. He paused, then added quietly, "They understood something we did not. That in a war of attrition, the plane that could take punishment, deliver overwhelming firepower, and be built by the thousands, would win." In 1943, the Germans laughed at the fat American fighter. By 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the heaviest single-engine fighter ever built, had become the voice of American industry. The roar of mass production turned into war. Each one was a monument in steel and fire, a symbol of what happens when courage meets machinery and willpower meets a factory line. For every Thunderbolt that fell, 10 more took its place. For every pilot who died, another climbed in the next morning and kept flying. And when those 8 guns opened fire, they didn't just shoot bullets. They fired the sound of inevitability. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America.